thought you psychologists, psychoanalysts would appreciate that. So then the image of the enemy, and I actually started this work. I became a speaker for PSR in 1983. I went to a speaker's training workshop in 1982, and I had no intention of speaking because I was too shy, but I decided I had to put that aside. And I started a group called Peace Research Associates, and Physicians for Social Responsibility, PSR, asked us to do a workshop with Jerome Frank on the image of the enemy, and I found that very interesting and did a lot of work on the image of the enemy. So Yuri Grafenbrenner was a social psychologist, and in the 50s he was in the Soviet Union, and he noticed that they would say the same things about themselves that we said about ourselves, and they would say the same things about each other, about us that we said about them. So he coined the term the mirror image of the enemy. And then there's concrete black and white thinking, like splitting, we're all good and they're all bad. So this is a righteous, decent, pious, God-blessing, psalm-singing, peace-loving, church-going Christian nuclear weapon. And the other one, this is a truly evil, non-believing, no-good, war-mongering, communist, atheist nuclear weapon. So it says, what a comfort to be on the side of the angels. And when we're gripped by fear, of course, and right now there's studies in terror management theory, that you become much more attached to your in-group and much more hostile to the out-group. And then the ultimate attribution error. So it says their shield is offensive, our shield is defensive. So the ultimate attribution error states that we attribute our motives and our behavior to environmental factors. That we're like peace-loving people and we really don't want to develop these weapons, but we have to because they're making us and we're threatened by them. But their behavior is because they're evil. It's genetic. It's who they are. So that's the ultimate attribution error. And then Miriam John will talk about gender in the next session, but there's, of course, there's gender element and machismo to the nuclear weapons. So after all these years of the arms race that peaked in 1986, in which time there were 65,056 nuclear weapons, and the breakdown is there. We had 23,000 USSR, Britain, France, and China. So this is pretty...
It's better when you're closer to the microphone.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to talk about nuclear myths and thanks for telling me. Nuclear myths and illusions. So I'm very interested. I read this chapter by R.D. Laing in the family therapy book on mystification, confusion, and conflicts, which is excellent, and it really explains a lot. And he's basically said that mystification is a plausible misrepresentation of reality where forms of exploitation are represented as forms of benevolence, and that you have to be either mad or bad of thinking of rebellion. So I'm going to go through some of the mystification around nuclear weapons, how we got compliance for that. And there's also, in mystification, there's also confusion, befuddlement, and not understanding what the real issue is. So this cartoon says, as I see it, our commitment to the peace process is only credible if our commitment to the war process is credible. And then there's the illusion of military superiority and conventionalization, which is applying the logic of conventional weapons to nuclear weapons. So if you have more ammunition, more bombs, more boats, more planes, you have an advantage. There's such a thing as military superiority. But when it comes to nuclear weapons, that kind of numerical superiority is basically meaningless. So, one of the psychological issues is that we apply logic from conventional weapons to nuclear weapons. And then Lifton and Falk go through some myths and illusions. So first is the illusion of safety, that nuclear weapons make us safe, that they're safeguards, and we had the bomb and now we're safe. And that sign is everything secures from the road to Los Alamos laboratory. Then there's the illusion of preparedness. So the first one has to do with evacuation procedures. Relax, we have 30 seconds until the heat wave hits. So we had these civil defense procedures. That's a family in a fallout shelter. And I'll just show you. This is my pocket shelter. that in 1982, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense said that dirt is the thing that protects us, and if we have enough shovels, everyone will be okay. Anyone remember enough shovels? So, no kidding, folks. And then with the Star Wars, there's the illusion of a defensive shield. Okay, so Reagan loved the idea of Star Wars because it appealed to the viscera of the American people. Stephen Cole talked about this. So, and people never thought it would work, but it had the illusion that we would be protected. And there was also a problem with this regarding the Soviet Union because we didn't agree to the policy of no first strike. So many countries have a policy that they will not be the first to use nuclear weapons, but they could use them in retaliation. So since we didn't have a first strike, no first strike policy, we could make a first strike, and then if they retaliated, we could allegedly protect ourselves with a shield. So that created more fear on the other side, and as we know, people are more dangerous when they're afraid. And then there's the illusion of victory, the finish line, who won? Now here's some nuclear absurdities, that we're using all of our resources to make it happen and little effort to prevent it from happening. We're opposed to destroy all in the name of destroying one another. Again, futurelessness. We're risking the future of life on the planet and future generations for this current conflict. And that just, the cartoon says, so what do you want to be when you grow up? Alive, if it's not too much trouble. So we're imposing burden. Also, some of this applies to climate chaos. And then there's an absurd disparity between the threat and response. So this is a smart bomb. It says, today I'm going to decimate a small city, kill tens of thousands, and leave 100,000 others ill and wounded to a slow and agonizing death. And then, of course, the solution is worse than any problem that it's intended to solve. And then we're willing to risk the lives of multitudes of innocent people, including our own, in response to punish a leader. It could even be in response to like one leader who we hate. And these are Hiroshima survivors. And this man over here, he comes to the UN every year. He's still alive. That's him when he was a boy, and he was like on his back for like over a year in the hospital and in a lot of pain. So these are the people that are the victims. And then I identified that there's a fear of disarmament and a fear of letting down one's guard. And this cartoon says, we can risk nuclear war, we can risk disarmament. So it was very interesting that in the rhetoric, whenever people talk about disarmament, like, oh my God, no, we can't do that. But in terms of building more, there was sort of a enthusiasm or calmness or acceptance that it's okay to build more weapons, but the thought of disarmament is frightening. And then there's deterrence theory, mutually assured destruction, which is flawed and is being challenged. So Richard Nedlibo, in this book, Psychology and Prevention of Nuclear War by Ralph K. White, has articles on a whole range of topics. It's from the 80s. It's out of print, but it's excellent. So there's several chapters here on deterrence theory and spiral theory. So he said deterrence can provoke the behavior it seeks to prevent. And Lieutenant Rob Green, who was a friend who I met through the UN Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference, said nuclear deterrence is a scheme for making nuclear war less probable by making it more probable. So there's also spiral theory, which is not talked about very much, and what Morton Deutsch calls a malignant spiral process of hostile interaction. So the first cartoon says, I'm not stopping until I catch up with him. And then the other one says, I hear complaints about, don't complain, I have disturbing reports of greater arms spending on the other side, and the same goes for you. So each side would say the other. Okay, then came the nuclear freeze, and that was a wonderful thing at the time that we became aware of it, because then we all had a common enemy and that we could unite. So the idea was that if there was a nuclear explosion, that there would be fallout and it would prevent heat from coming in and there would be nuclear freeze. Okay, I'm going to go through these quickly because I want to get to the NPT. So then we had 1 million people in Central Park, and there were demonstrations all over the planet of the year. And then we had the end of the Cold War. This is like to 99 bottles of beer on the wall, 50,000 nuclear warheads on the wall, 50,000 nuclear weapons on the wall. So this is Reagan and Gorbachev. And then we had this idea of the peace dividend. Do you know what happened to that? It got replaced by the rogue state doctrine. And this cartoon says is that, as the Cold War ends, communism is dead and the threat of nuclear war is gone, but then we have tribalism, so then we have a whole other issue. And then nuclear narcissism is that our nuclear weapons, before the nuclear weapons were evil themselves and we had to get rid of them. Now the possessors are evil. The weapons are no longer evil. So our nukes are good, your nukes are bad, we can have them, you can't. And then this is from the Pakistan nuclear test. So then there's nuclear envy, pride, and prestige. The nukes are back, we're the protesters. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So Kennedy was concerned that in a few years there could be 25 countries with nuclear weapons, and they had to do something to prevent that from happening. So they came up with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, so to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. So the NPT has 3 pillars: non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. So which one do you think we haven't succeeded on? Anyway, so which is basically disarmament. No, it's been pretty successful with non-proliferation, and there's a huge push for nuclear power, which I can get into another time. There was a bargain that all you countries out there that don't have nuclear weapons, you agree that you're not going to get them. And us 5 countries who have nuclear weapons, we promise in exchange for that that we'll negotiate in good faith towards total disarmament. So that's Article 6 of the NPT. I won't spend time on that. Okay, so last month, from April 27th to May 22nd, we had every 5 years there's a 4-week review of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And then 3 years before there's a 2-week preparatory meeting. So it's a big deal. Here's John Kerry speaking. Here's Zarif speaking. So the first few days, all the countries do their presentations. Then there's a reception that night, and there was a display in the UN from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is a survivor from Hiroshima speaking. I'm just doing this to give you a flavor of what it's like to be there. Abolition 2000, there are 107 groups of NGOs, activists, lawyers, doctors, religious leaders, Marshall Islanders, all kinds of people. So in the morning we have Abolition Caucus where we go over our strategies. 9 o'clock, we have delegates from different countries coming in to speak to us. Of course, all the delegates from the non-nuclear weapon states come in and they tell us how hard it is in the meeting to deal with the nuclear weapon states. They won't disarm, and of course the United States, nuclear weapon states come and say, well, we still need a deterrent and we are reducing our nuclear weapons, etc. And then there are side events on weapon modernization, on don't bank on the bomb, on radiation, on scientific, all kinds of initiatives. There are many, many initiatives. The biggest initiative that had the biggest impact is on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. And there were 3 major UN conferences, one in Norway, one in Mexico, and one in Vienna. And this is mentioned all the time, humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. So this is a new initiative over the last few years. And then the Marshall Islanders have filed a lawsuit with the International Criminal Court against the nuclear weapon states for not not keeping their commitment to Article 6 to negotiate for disarmament. Okay. All right, I'm getting the wrap up. Mayors for Peace, gender nuclear weapons. So there are many initiatives that you can see.